So you've reached the end of the game and you realize you still have all the items that you had this entire time while you were trying to beat the game. Sometimes you might think you're using them actually efficiently, but by hogging them until the end of the game and not using them at the moment that you need to, you're actually not using that item at all. If you're one of the people that falls into this category, then this is definitely the video for you. Welcome to Item Management for Dummies, done today by Axum from Fire Emblem. I want to start off with the most common type of item in the game, or the one that we think about the most, which are consumables. So these include elixirs, vulneraries, and pure waters. The way I want you to think about vulnerary usage is pretty simple. Think of it from an action economy perspective. Anytime somebody needs to be healed, you could either heal them with a healer, or you could pop a vulnerary on your own action and conserve that healer's turn. Usually you are going to want to use your healers to get experience and level up, but the thing is, if you have somebody that you need to heal immediately, holding on to that action might actually be valuable for you. What do I mean by this? Let's say you're moving around with a unit that can't really perform any combat, or he can't reach any objective, but he took some damage. In that case, just pop a vulnerary and you'll be able to counterattack on the next phase, and you'll conserve your healer's action as well. To be honest with you, I have never ever run out of vulneraries on any Fire Emblem I've ever played. There's always been way more available than needed. Elixirs are a little bit rare, and in some games they heal all HP, in some games they don't, but for the most part I also want you to treat it like vulneraries too. The pure water is one of the most powerful items in any Fire Emblem game. This is across all the games in the series. It's absolutely fantastic. It is +7 to magical resistance and an FE5 magic itself, flat, for the action of just eating it for one turn. That is so good. It makes characters that have middling magic resistance, something like 12 or 14, pop up to 21 resistance. Now you need so much more damage to be able to damage them. You walk up into the range of the enemy units that have magic, you pop the pure water, and are able to soak the damage and deal with the mage threats on enemy phase. They're very good. I usually recommend them, especially in Iron Man's. Those 7-point differences are very important for it as well, and super useful. Like tonics, which is something else that you should be utilizing in your gameplay. Tonics are more important though if you're looking at specific thresholds on maps and you don't think you can hit them. That's really what tonics are there for. So let's say you scout the map out, there's a specific speed threshold you need to meet, you can't really meet that speed threshold with the items you have, then you go ahead and pop a tonic, you get that +2 speed, and you're good to go. Since we're on the topic of tonics, I'm going to go ahead and move on to stat boosters, which are tonics but that last forever. So there are very different approaches to this. Some people like to hoard all the stat boosters, give it to one unit, make that super unit, and go from there. Some people like to just patch up bad stats and correct that. Let's say a character is missing a specific threshold, kind of like tonics itself, and by popping a speed wing, you'll be able to push them above that threshold. It's super useful. Now, are you going to dump a speed wing into a general? No, there's no point in that because it's a wasted stat. Just like how you should use resistance stat boosters on units that have 1-2 range, because they're going to get the most mileage out of that resistance stat itself. Either beef up a magical tank or give it to a paladin that can 1-2 range more reliably. Magic stats should be given to magical units, obviously. Some people like to give them to healers. I prefer offensively because then you use it offensive and defensive when they get access to staves. HP should just be put on units that are either going to see a lot of combat or somebody that you're really afraid of losing, but that has such a low threshold that maybe they won't be attacked at all, or if they do, they can survive one round of combat. Somebody like this is maybe Micaiah, an example. She has very low HP. You give her a Seraph Robe, it patches it up a little bit. Now she can be a little bit more aggressive and push up a little more if you need to, but at the same time, she shouldn't be seeing much combat, so there's an argument for not using it on her at all. Users of skill like Saul, Ether, anything that can self-sustain is also very useful because that HP threshold will help back, and it's also very good on units that are fast because each point of HP is going to translate to one of defense and res due to not being able to be doubled. I personally prefer to give it to people that see a lot of combat. An example of this is something like Jill in Radiant Dawn without transfer bonuses. Her HP is kind of lacking, but you give her the HP, she pops up a little bit, and now she has a little more bulk to be able to do combat. Boots, for the most part, should be put on your main character or on a dancer to see the most usage out of it. Since those characters are usually deployed every time they get an opportunity, they'll be able to abuse that move, the dancer in particular, because it allows other characters to take more actions. The goddess icon is an item that honestly is usually just sold for gold. However, if a unit is facing low crit chances, like something like Stefan, then perhaps investing the goddess icon into him to reduce those low crit chances is not such a bad idea. We're going to move on into promotion items now. I'm going to be honest with you. If it's not being used, it's gold. Sometimes it's even better to sell them than it's to actually use it. Or you're going to use them on somebody as soon as possible. Early promoting is very, very good. It's very rare to not want to early promote somebody. You particularly want to early promote people that get a second weapon type. More so if it's staves, because you now have a second healer that can supplant the other healer who couldn't do combat at all. And usually the stave units are pretty powerful because they have access to magic damage as well. So stave utility is the biggest priority for your promotion items in my opinion, followed by then a second weapon type. So something like a hand axe on a hero class is pretty good. Things like that really help because you have more utility and more windows to cover. If it gives you extra movement, which most do, but if there's like a sustainable gain from promoting, then you might as well do that. Stats really aren't super necessary if you're already meeting the specific thresholds to beat combat. Something like a sword master can be delayed because you're already probably tearing it up as a myrmidon. You're gonna get some crazy bonuses after, and that's fair, but it doesn't hurt you to wait if other units can benefit more from a second utility type or a second weapon type. Speaking of weapons, the legendary weapons in the game are usually so busted that for some reason people don't want to use them at all. Just use them. Use the weapons. You're probably not going to break it. Unless you are legit just putting it on enemy phase and just pressing spacebar so that you speed through that GBA animation, you're not going to break this legendary weapon. It is very hard. You have to really misplay. There are 20 uses between the moment that you use it and the moment that it breaks, at least in the GBA ones. In the other games, there are even more. You shouldn't be afraid of using a legendary weapon. Do you need to use it? Just use it. The same thing goes for most brave weapons in the game. If something needs to die this turn right now, do not take the risk and just kill it. Just use a brave weapon and kill it. The only things I'll say that are maybe you should be a little bit cognizant of using are boltings, warps, and rescues. I also do recommend using boltings to counter other siege weapons. So you use your boltings to counter their siege weapons, you use your warp to counter their siege weapons, and you use your rescue to counter their siege weapons. Sometimes the rescue will allow you to just send someone in, body that unit, rescue them out of danger, and that's really what it is. So siege weapons are where you want to try to counter out with the use of boltings and warps, because that really alleviates and creates a lot of space that otherwise you wouldn't have access to if you didn't use bolting or warp to open up that siege area. I can't really iterate enough that offensive staves are super powerful. One thing I did in FE6, for example, is I would readily hammer the Berserk staff just so I could get more Berserk uses so I could reduce enemy density on enemy phase and let them kill each other for a little bit instead of killing me. Staves can allow for a vast majority of options of being able to disrupt enemy formations or reach inaccessible positions that you otherwise couldn't. Do not let the game go by without using the stave to its maximum utility. If you don't need to use it frivolously, that's fine. But if you have to use it, just use it. Recently, I was playing FE5, and I was considering this whole strategy of trying to rewarp to get a proc so that I could talk to Amalda with Shroff to recruit him and blah. All of this panned out. We wasted 1 hour trying to do this. This is not the way I'm supposed to play this. This is clearly a waste of time. I warped Shroff in, I spoke to Amalda, and we beat the chapter right after that. No headaches. So conserving that warp staff was not useful. It was actually way more useful for me just to use the warp staff so I could just beat the chapter. Another set of items that's usually not covered, but I'll cover in here in this, guys, are items that you should hold on to. Things like scrolls, Hoplon Guard, the bands, spheres. Usually they maximize growth rates or to fix skewed growth values that have happened over your run. I try to make sure that my unit's thresholds go above a certain value, so if somebody needs speed or strength, I usually give it to them so that I can fix that while they're leveling up. I don't really believe in just marrying a band or a sphere to someone. I usually like to swap them around to try to keep those averages up. And when somebody starts to fall behind on that, I'll then go and give them that scroll to see if they can maybe catch up as it progresses, because the other units are already on the averages of what they need. Definitely use these. Don't ignore them. They're super valuable because they basically translate to 1 or 2 extra stats across a couple of levels, which is not a lot, but it's actually a stat boost if you think about it. So using them well and knowing how to pass them around is really good. For the other ones, the Hoplon Guard and the items that basically prevent enemy crits, I strongly recommend you give them to your boss killer, or that has to deal with enemies that have killing edges or killing weapons in general. They also are very good on units that have low luck and low % crit chances against them, but then you just give them the Hop on Guard to negate that. So something like this is null in FE8. He doesn't really have a good way to circumvent his low luck stat if you want to use Nosferatu to enemy face tank. But if you give him the Hop on Guard, he now can't be crit, and every hit that he hits is going to regenerate his HP. Forging is a very important thing in Fire Emblem itself, but it's not 100% necessary. Usually you can beat the game without using the forge mechanic at all. And I'm going to lay out which ones I think are better to forge if you have the opportunity to do so. So my rule of thumb, personally, is usually I will forge the 1-2 range weapons, then I'll forge effective weapons, and finally I'll forge magic because resistance is usually less than defense on average for the Fire Emblem games. Usually stronger 1-2 range weapons are really rare to come across in the game. Things like the Tomahawk or the Spear or the Short Lance. All of those usually have limited amount of values before they break, then you can't get them back. But if you have the option to be able to forge a 1-2 range weapon and give it the necessary stats, usually to fix its hit rate and maybe add a little bit more of might, you can really use this to your advantage, especially in the early game before you get access to these weapons. Best weapons to forge are usually the effective weapons because of how the formula works for effective damage. So things like bows, Rider's Banes, any item like that that usually can be forged can get a higher return because of the fact that you're increasing its might, and that will also multiply when you're attacking an enemy. I do not recommend forging iron, steel, or silver swords. Those are going to come through and you're just going to use them anyway, and they're going to be more than enough to deal with the majority of the combat in the game. And last but not least, there are also some items in the game that actually confer specific skills to people, things like Vantage, Wrath. This can also be taken into consideration, something like the Emblem rings or the Gambit skills from 3 houses. All of these are kind of like equipment that you put on a unit, and that unit then learns that skill and they can move forward through the game with that skill activated. Now, for 3 houses, Engage and Telia series, you can actually remove that equipment off and give it to somebody else. The Gambits, the rings, and the skills. But for Path of Radiance and FE5, FE4, usually the skill tends to stay with the person that has it, unless it's like a ring, like the Pursuit ring, which you can also pass around but revolves money. Either way that you're going to approach this, it doesn't really matter if you can pass it on or you can't. The important thing to know is give it to somebody that is actively going to use those skills. Something like Wrath is really good on enemy phase units that can basically crit back and just destroy somebody without ever getting hit at all, which is a reason why Battalion, Wrath, Vantage, Dimitri is so powerful and so good even on Maddening mode in Fire Emblem 3 houses. You also want to look at things like Adept for maybe sorcerers that can attack twice and then minimize their incoming damage. Miracle Bands should usually be given to characters with high luck so that they can avoid getting one-tapped if the necessity arises. Really try to maximize the utility of the items that you get, marrying them to the combat potential of the units that synchronize well with those skills that come into the game. Well, I hope that after this, you're going to reach the end of the game and you won't have any items in your inventory besides maybe 1 iron sword. No, not really. But I really hope that this guide helped you in order for you to use your items in a little bit more efficient manner or marry your items to utility as you progress throughout the Fire Emblem games. This has been Axum from Fire Embros. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Please comment down below if you like this video, if you think that I got things right, if you think I got things wrong, or if you think this helped you with item management at all. Also, leave a like and subscribe. It really does help out the channel, and I do truly appreciate it. I hope you guys have a wonderful day.